Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a horror fantasy film, Baskin. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins in a child's bedroom at night. The young boy is woken up by strange moaning noises coming from his mother's bedroom. He gets out of bed and presses his ear to the door as the noises continue. He is about to knock, but decides not to. Instead, he goes to the living room where the TV was left open, and there is nothing but static on the screen. A red light flashes from the other side of the room, and he sees a bloody hand reaching out to him. He frantically knocks on his mother's door, but no one answers. In the next scene, a hooded figure walks along an empty street. He heads to the back door of a small restaurant. The restaurant is mostly empty, except for a rowdy group of 5 police officers loudly chatting. They first discuss the upcoming football match and bet on which team will win. The hooded figure knocks on the door and delivers a bucket of raw meat to the owner's son, who cuts the meat for serving the customers. Back inside the dining area, the driver officer is hunched over a separate table and is visibly sick because of a headache. He rudely tells their chief to shut up, since he is making his headache even worse. The others take his rudeness in stride and continue their explicit topic of sex. The aggressive officer, called Officer Aggressive for short, teases the youngest cop in the group, nicknamed Officer Handsome, for being too handsome to go to brothels like the rest of them. Officer Handsome replies that one of his high school friends took him to a brothel to lose his virginity. Officer Aggressive then launches into a story about how he picked up a gorgeous girl on the side of the road and took her to a motel room for some fun. However, he discovered that she was actually a man, but Officer Aggressive still slept with him. Right then the owner's son serves them at their table, and laughs with the rest of the group at the officer's story. But Officer Aggressive does not like that he was laughing along, and quickly gets angry at him. The owner himself steps in, and tries to calm him down. Meanwhile, the driver officer cannot take it anymore, and runs to the restaurant bathroom to throw up. He sees a small frog on the soap stand. The other police officers try to leave with Officer Aggressive, but he insists on fighting the owner's son. The chief gets fed up with him, and tells Officer Aggressive to go put his money where his mouth is, and beat up the young man. Officer Aggressive takes the challenge, and hits him in the head. The owner's son gets a few punches in, but Officer Aggressive quickly pummels him. The driver officer looks at the mirror, and screams horrifically. This alarms the group, so they rush to open the restroom stall. However, the driver officer appears to be fine. He tells his friends that he felt like he was losing his mind there, when he stared at the mirror. After a while, the driver officer feels better, and they decide to leave. He volunteers to drive despite what happened. While on the road, the group's mood is lifted, and they start singing along to a song on the radio. But their fun is cut short when an officer receives a distress call from the Ncgak neighborhood. Another unit is already there, but their unit will be backup. According to the rumor, this particular neighborhood has a shrine, and is reportedly a site of many hauntings. The radio suddenly stops working, as they get nearer to the neighborhood. Suddenly, a pale, undressed man crosses the road, and the driver officer slams on the brakes. The police officers rush out of the car, and try to look for the man, but there is no sign of him. They do see strange scratches on the side of their car, and a pile of small frogs on the road. They get back inside the car, and continue driving. But another man appears out of nowhere, and the driver officer hits him, then crashes the car into the nearby river. Suddenly, the scene shifts. Officer Handsome is sitting with the chief at the same restaurant table, while the others are crowded around a television. Officer Handsome tells the chief about his childhood friend, who saw his father's soul leaving his body when he died. One night, Officer Handsome woke up, and there was a crowd of strange people around him, and the same childhood friend came forward and comforted him. It turns out that Officer Handsome is the same boy shown at the beginning of the film. He had woken up from this dream, and heard strange noises from his mother's room. Then he turned off the TV in the living room, and a figure appeared in his bedroom. It was his childhood friend that he saw, and he was scared. He banged on his mother's door, but then woke up. It was a dream within a dream. But what is even stranger was that the next day, he heard that his childhood friend died that night, after being hit by a car. Ever since then, he would often have that dream. A year later, he lost his parents to a car crash, and he was raised by his uncle. When he entered the police force, he was placed under the care of his uncle's friend, the chief, who had become a father figure to the young Officer Handsome. The story ends, but the chief's face turned serious, and he asked Officer Handsome if he could see anyone else with them in the room. Officer Handsome looks around and finds the other 3 officers are gone. Hidden behind the chief is a cloaked figure. He reaches out to Officer Handsome with a bloody hand, and suddenly, the room is overflowing with blood. Officer Handsome regains his consciousness after the van hits the water. The others haul him out of the river, and they discover that they are effectively stranded, since the vehicle no longer works. Officer Aggressive is angry, and blames the driver officer for the accident. Some locals arrive later, and rescue the police officers. One of them starts laughing, and Officer Aggressive threatens the man, and kicks over his bucket of crabs. Another local pleads with Officer Aggressive, and explains that the man is mentally disabled. The three officers then go back to the road to look for the man they ran over. But there is nobody there, despite all of them seeing the car hit the man. The locals inform Officer Handsome and the chief that they are already in the Nsigak neighborhood. So the police officers decide to investigate the distress call coming from there. Soon after, they arrive at an abandoned building that used to be a police station during the Ottoman Empire. The initial responders' car is parked in front of it. The group feels scared, since the building looks dark and creepy. Before they go in, the chief mysteriously says to Officer Handsome that he holds the key to all of this. The driver officer tries using the radio in the police car, but it doesn't work either. Inside, they find a lone police officer, banging his head on the wall repeatedly. He has a huge gash on his forehead, and is crying. The police officer doesn't say anything, and just stares into the distance. Slowly, he points toward a police cap lying on the ground. The other officers in his unit have disappeared without a trace. Meanwhile, the driver officer wanders into a dirty room with stalls. In each stall, there are people with blindfolds and wearing chains. They are covered in blood, and some of them seem to be having sex with each other. The driver officer drops his flashlight in surprise, and the people swarm all over him. The chief and the rest of the group enter a room with chains and blood dripping. There are also occult symbols and objects around the room. On one wall is an explicit drawing of a body being tortured. The other officer finds a dead naked girl lying inside a cage in a corner, while Officer Handsome finds a blindfolded woman eating a carcass on a slab, and another one dissecting a body. Suddenly, a cloaked figure comes up behind the officer, and hits him on the head with a hammer. Meanwhile, Officer Handsome starts shooting in a panic, and the people wearing chains start chasing the remaining police officers. Right then, Officer Handsome gets another surreal vision. He is once again sitting in front of the chief in the same restaurant. The chief tells him that a supernatural force had summoned them to that building, not a distress call. The chief had always been attuned to the paranormal, and the same thing is happening to Officer Handsome. The vision ends, and the group wakes up, chained to wooden posts in a dark dungeon. The leader of the cult of people in chains descends from a staircase. He is wearing a robe. As he makes his way through the crowd, his followers all bow and yearn for his touch. He slowly removes his robe, and the police officers see a bald man with a deformed face. He speaks calmly, and welcomes his guests to the chamber. The leader explains that hell is not a place, but something you carry inside you. Hell had chosen these police officers, and the leader and his cult of pain-loving followers will guide them through the horrors. The cult leader approaches the weak officer. He splits his shirt, and disembowels him with his nails. The officer's intestines slide to the floor, and he dies. A follower unchains him, and his body is taken by the other cultists. The leader adds that this is not the end for him. When they die, they will simply wake up, and go through the cycle of pain and torture all over again. Next, the cult leader goes to Officer Aggressive. Brash as ever, he proclaims that the police is the law, and how dare they disrespect the law. However, the cult leader calmly replies that human authority cannot stand against hell's wishes. The leader brandishes a knife, and asks Officer Aggressive to open his eyes and heart to his cult's beliefs. He chants in a foreign language, and then sticks the blade in Officer Aggressive's eyes repeatedly. Blood squirts out, and a blindfold is placed on his head, similar to the blindfolds the rest of the cultists are wearing. After that, a naked woman wearing a goat mask slinks out of a closet and crawls to Officer Aggressive. As part of his initiation to the cult, Officer Aggressive will have a smelly exercise with her. Afterward, the leader remarks that his heart and mind are still not open. Suddenly, Officer Aggressive quivers and collapses on the floor, dead. A tarantula creeps out of his mouth and is taken away by a follower. The leader targets Officer Handsome next, but the chief protests and says that he is just a kid. The leader touches his head, and then goes to the police chief, who bravely faces his fate. He thanks the police chief for taking care of Officer Handsome, because now the boy is ready to claim his destiny. The leader then slices a knife across the chief's throat, and bathes in his blood. After that, Officer Handsome gets sucked into another vision. He sees the chief dying on the floor of the restaurant, and he rushes to him while crying. The chief whispers with his dying breath that he promised Officer Handsome's uncle he will protect him. He then says that he is now giving Officer Handsome the key. Officer Handsome plucks the strange key from the chief's throat and uses it to stab the cult leader right in his forehead. Officer Handsome gets free from his chains, and he enacts his revenge on the cult leader by smashing his head with a wooden stool. Around him, the followers cower in fear and do nothing. Officer Handsome crawls his way out of the building and laughs triumphantly. He runs through the woods like a madman covered in blood and walks onto the road. There, Officer Handsome sees an oncoming vehicle, and he desperately tries to get the driver's attention. As the vehicle goes closer, it becomes very familiar with its blue and red patrol lights. Officer Handsome realizes too late that the vehicle was the same van they were all riding in earlier, and that he was the man who caused them to crash. The movie ends with the car hitting Officer Handsome and then swerving to the river, signifying that the process of pain and torture is starting over again. But what the cult leader said, hell is not a place, but something you carry inside you. Ever since they were at the restaurant, they were already fated to experience hell and its horror, just like that information implied by the police chief, who told Officer Handsome that he had the key to all of this right before they got into the restaurant. It can be deduced that Officer Handsome is essential to end the torture cycle, which otherwise would be repeated over and over again. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.